in this case is the software that we're going to use to configure the firewall. You may have a different one if you have a different device, but this is what we're using. And so this has a bunch of information about my device. Yes, I know this is my real IP address, but I will reset this, request a new one. And we'll talk about how that gets done in a little bit. But essentially, this is where you configure your device. Okay, good. So we can talk to our device and we can configure it. You set up all the settings, and now we can hook it up to the internet. And this is silly, but I thought this was confusing that I would connect the modem to what is clearly supposed to be the wireless port. And shouldn't my router go to the wireless port? Because surely the W is for wireless, but it's not. It's for wide area network, the WAN. And wide area network is sort of the parent of all the other local networks. In this case, our WAN is just responsible for talking to the internet. So what it's important to know here then is that the WAN port represents a network with its own, that has its own IP address. This port has an IP address. Really what that means, I guess that's a little misleading, is that the internet service provider is assigning my WAN network this IP address so that when I talk to my internet service provider, this is how it identifies me. That identifier, this whole setup is leading to the WAN on my firewall. Okay, so how do I get this number? And will it always be that number? You get that number through a thing called DHCP leasing. You may have seen that in your network settings on your computer. I don't know what it stands for, but I do know what it does. And basically, it gives out IP addresses when you ask it for one. In our case, our internet service providers use dynamic DHCP leasing, which means it can change your IP address, semi-regularly or whenever you ask it for a new one, a new lease. And so that's what I got, was this. And I can ask for a new one and get it, which we will not cover here. Okay, moving on. So now I've got the internet hooked up to my firewall. My firewall is hooked up to my computer, and I can see the internet now. And the firewall is filtering traffic between the WAN and the LAN. So what is the LAN and how is it different than the WAN? LAN is local area network, and it's going to include everything in my house, everything that I want to connect in my house, including the Wi-Fi router. These are separate because the WAN is responsible for outside communication and LAN is responsible for inside communication, or wide communication versus local communication. So then there's this third port and other ports on there that are labeled optional, or opt1, opt2 on my device. And I didn't quite understand that. It said that I could plug devices in there if I wanted them to use my firewall. So I did. I plugged in my Hue bridge, which controls light bulbs in my apartment. And now it was hooked up to the internet, and my LAN, like I could use it like I normally did. And I didn't understand, well, is it its own network? If each of these is its own network, does this mean that its own? No, not really. It could, but it's all about how you set it up. And in the instructions that the author gives, there was a section where we set up a bridge, and the settings for that are here, that basically tied those optional ports together with the LAN and said, treat these as one network, and we're going to make it the LAN. So effectively, this Hue bridge is now part of the LAN, or it's inside of this realm. So when I looked up, so you can look up actually what the IP address of that is by going to, let's see, status, DHCP leases, and you can see it right here. So it's 192.168.1.104, which is cool because that makes sense. Our home base here is 192.168.1, and our new one has, the Hue bridge has the exact same thing except the last number has changed. And that's going to happen for all the, I forget what it is, 10, whatever. All the new devices are going to have the same 3 numbers in front, and then just the last number will change. And that shows you that it's part of that network. I'm simplifying here, I know, but this is what helps me understand it, is keeping it simple. So then the instructions are to hook up the LAN to your Wi-Fi and then connect your PC to your Wi-Fi. And hey, look, now you can get all the way back to the internet. Isn't that cool? So I said, okay, cool. I want to check out what my new IP address is. I'm pretty sure it's going to be like this, just a different number than the first three. But it was not. In fact, the third number was different, and I forget what the other one was. We'll find out here in a second. And that is because this has its own subnet. All right, so what the heck is a subnet? A subnet is basically a collection of numbers in this schema that is a part of the original network, but a different chunk of it. And all of its numbers will follow the same pattern where it has sort of a prefix that stays the same, but then the end will change. So 192.168 stays the same, and that's actually, again, symbolizing that we are on the same network, all part of the LAN, but this is now its own new little hub, its own little LAN. That might be the wrong verbiage. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it's going to give out addresses through DHCP that start with 192.168.11. If we were to hook up another wireless router, it might be something like 192.168.120. whatever. Okay, so I'm beating that to death. But now everything I connect, whether it's wireless or through the Ethernet jack, like with this Raspberry Pi over here, is going to get an IP address that looks like this. So at that point, I thought, okay, well, can I still get to this? And sure enough, if I type that into my browser, it does get me back to the firewall. So how do I get into the software that's in my router if I want to change the password or the SSID? Well, the instructions that come with it say, well, you can just go to 192.168.1.1 and you can do it there, which is true if it's the only device besides your modem, and it is considered the root of your network tree or the home device, but it's not. So it was getting confused with this. So I had to figure out what the address was by looking at my IP address on the PC and saying, oh, okay, my home base for this, whatever I'm talking to, is based on these numbers. And then I just changed it to a 1 because that's what's used to say, hey, whatever the root of this subnet is should be available at the .1. And sure enough, that's what it was. And once I did that, change this back, I was able to get into the software. Now I'm running open source software on mine because I ordered it from a place that sells routers pre-configured with open source firmware on it. There's a link below for that. But yours will be could be the software by your manufacturer. So the Linksys software, the network software. Thanks, Dad. And it will have a lot of the same functionalities that we're talking about here. So it doesn't, what I'm about to say doesn't only apply to DDWORT. So you can see up here that it has its own IP address, but it's calling it a WAN IP address, and that doesn't make sense. But it does make sense if you go back in here, look at the IP addresses. Okay, there's my Netgear router. That's where it is. All right. Notice that the 111, though, is not the address that I used to talk to it, which you can see up here. And that's okay because it just means that the physical device has an IP address, but the web server that I'm talking to is accessed by going to this IP address. Because it's .11, it's still going to go to here. It's still going to go to here, and then the .1 is the thing that's going to serve up the web address. But this thing itself has an IP address on this network that is 1.111. Why does it say WAN? Because to it, this is the local network, anything that's connected to it, and its daddy network is the wide area network, the WAN. So daddies are WANs, children's are LANs. That's how I think about it. All right, going back to this, how did we get the 11? Where did the 11 come from? I'm not entirely 100% sure if it's something that's baked in or if that was something that was given to it by the Firewall device, but I know that I can find it and change it and set it up here. And basically it says, this is the IP address where things will be started. This is where you can find me. Thank you very much. And then all the addresses I'm going to give out on my DHCP server will start with 11 and then the number 100 and up. And so that's what I found to be true when I connected these things. They were all 100, well, not that number, and up. So something like this. And the same would be true for a device that I plugged straight in. So that's basically everything. The last thing I want to point out is that in your wireless setup here, you'll find that this needs to be an AP. That's an access point. And what that means is basically that it's going to take the traffic from these devices and it's going to send those on down the line and let someone else take care of it. It's not going to do the WAN related stuff. It is just going to shuttle that data to the firewall for filtering and blocking or whatever, and then out. I can't think of anything else at the moment that would be helpful, but if I left out something or something is still confusing, please leave a comment, and if I don't know, I'll learn it, and then I'll know something new. All right. Bye, I guess.